The Tuesday morning sun hit Peachtree Street like a blowtorch. Heat shimmered off the pavement in visible waves, distorting the facades of glass towers that lined Midtown Atlanta. It was barely 9 o'clock, and the temperature had already cracked 90 degrees, the kind of morning that made patrol officers curse their dark uniforms and pray for cloud cover that would never come. Lieutenant Sarah Collins adjusted her sunglasses and felt sweat trickling down her spine beneath her tactical vest. Beside her, K-9 Max trotted with his tongue out, panting steadily but maintaining perfect heel position. 7 years of partnership had taught them both how to endure discomfort without complaint. The job demanded it. They moved through the morning crowd of Midtown, weaving between executives clutching iced coffees and tourists consulting their phones for directions. The district hummed with commerce and ambition, steel and glass monuments to corporate Atlanta rising on every block. Sarah kept her eyes moving, scanning faces, doorways, alleys. Max did the same with his nose, cataloguing 1,000 scents invisible to human perception. The call had come in as a routine sweep request. A paranoid building manager on 14th Street had reported suspicious activity near the parking structure. Probably nothing. Usually nothing. But in the current climate of heightened alerts and whispered threats, every call got answered. They had cleared the parking structure in 20 minutes. Nothing but oil stains and a homeless man sleeping behind a dumpster, whom Sarah had directed to a nearby shelter with a gentleness that surprised the security guard watching from his booth. Now they were walking back toward the unmarked cruiser parked 3 blocks away, taking the long route through the commercial corridor, because Max needed the exercise and Sarah needed the air, even if that air felt like breathing through a wet blanket. The parking meter stood at the corner of 14th and Juniper, one of hundreds dotting the sidewalks of Midtown. Grey metal post, digital display, solar panel on top. Completely unremarkable. Sarah had walked past 1,000 just like it without a second glance. Max stopped. Sarah felt the leash go taut and turned to look at her partner. The Malinois had frozen mid-stride, his entire body rigid with attention, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring in rapid micro-movements, tail held horizontal and absolutely still. She knew that posture, had seen it dozens of times in training and too many times in the field. It was the posture that preceded discovery. The posture that said something is here, and you need to pay attention. Sarah stepped closer, keeping her voice low and calm. Max did not move. His focus remained locked on the parking meter with an intensity that bordered on hypnotic. She followed his gaze to the metal post, searching for anything unusual. The digital display showed the standard rate information. The payment slot appeared normal. The solar panel caught the morning light, nothing visible. But Max had never alerted on nothing. She keyed her radio. "Dispatch, this is Collins. I need a secondary unit to my location. Corner of 14th and Juniper, East Side. K-9 alert on a parking meter. Possible device." The dispatcher's response came back professional and immediate. "Copy that, Lieutenant. Secondary en route. ETA 4 minutes. Do you need EOD?" Sarah studied the meter again. Max had not moved a muscle. His breathing had slowed to almost nothing, every ounce of his being concentrated on the object before him. "Affirmative on EOD. Notify Captain Morrison. Start clearing a perimeter, 2 blocks in all directions." She heard the dispatcher's sharp intake of breath before the professional mask returned. "Understood, Lieutenant. Initiating protocols now." Sarah reached down and touched Max's shoulder, a signal he understood. He relaxed slightly, but did not break his focus. "Good boy," she murmured. "Good boy, stay with me." The next 4 minutes stretched like hours. Sarah kept her position, using her body to casually block pedestrian traffic while keeping her demeanor calm enough not to spark panic. A woman in a business suit tried to push past toward the meter, phone in hand, probably looking to pay for parking. Sarah redirected her with a smile and a gesture toward the next block. The woman huffed but complied. 2 patrol cars arrived simultaneously, officers emerging with the controlled urgency of professionals who understood that visible alarm created civilian alarm. Sarah briefed them quickly, and they began the delicate work of evacuation, moving people away from the area with firm politeness and vague explanations about a gas leak. The EOD van arrived 12 minutes later. Sarah recognized Sergeant Pete Nakamura behind the wheel, a 30-year veteran of the bomb squad with hands steady enough to defuse anything and a temperament calm enough to defuse anyone. He stepped out, assessed the scene with experienced eyes, and approached Sarah with his kit bag slung over one shoulder. "Your dog hit on this," he said. "Not a question. Hard alert. Has not broken focus for 15 minutes. Nakamura studied Max, then the meter. "In all my years, I have never seen a K-9 alert on a parking meter." "He is not wrong," Sarah said. "He has never been wrong." Nakamura nodded slowly. "Then, let us assume he is not starting today." The bomb tech began his work with methodical precision. Portable X-ray first, the device positioned carefully to capture the interior of the meter housing. Sarah watched his face as he studied the screen, saw the exact moment his expression shifted from professional skepticism to genuine concern. "What is it?" she asked. Nakamura turned the screen toward her. The X-ray revealed the guts of the parking meter, but there was something else inside. A secondary container, roughly cylindrical, nested within the housing. Wires ran from it to a small circuit board, and attached to the circuit board was what appeared to be a cellular modem. "That is not standard municipal equipment," Sarah said. No, it is not. Can you identify the container?" Nakamura zoomed the image. The resolution was not perfect, but the shape was distinctive. Pressurized canister. Looks like it is designed for aerosol dispersal. And those markings on the side. I cannot make them out clearly, but that symbol there. He pointed to a small icon visible on the canister. "That is a biohazard indicator." Sarah felt cold despite the brutal heat. She keyed her radio again, this time on the emergency channel that went straight to the watch commander. "Central, this is Collins. We have a confirmed device, possible biological agent. I need CDC notification and federal liaison immediately. Lock down a 6-block radius. No civilian traffic, no exceptions." The response came within seconds, the watch commander's voice tight with controlled alarm. "Understood. Federal notification in progress. Incident command being established. Collins, hold your position and maintain scene integrity. Copy." The next 2 hours transformed a sleepy Tuesday morning in Midtown into a coordinated chaos of overlapping jurisdictions and competing priorities. Hazmat teams arrived in their white suits, looking like astronauts in the Georgia heat. FBI agents materialized with their dark suits and darker expressions. CDC representatives set up a mobile command post in a commandeered parking lot, their faces grim behind N95 masks. Sarah remained at the perimeter, Max at her side, both of them watching the controlled pandemonium with the patience of those who knew that the real work happened in the quiet margins, while agencies argued over territory. Captain Morrison found her there, his broad face slick with sweat and concern. "Hell of a find, Collins." Max found it. "I just answered the phone." Morrison looked at the dog, who had finally relaxed from his alert posture, but remained watchful. "They are saying it is sophisticated, beyond anything domestic they have seen." "Who is they?" Morrison jerked his chin toward a cluster of people in civilian clothes, their body language screaming, "Federal." 3-letter types. Feds took over the investigation about 90 seconds after they arrived. We are officially in a support role. Sarah watched the federal agents conferring, their heads bent over tablets and phones. One of them kept glancing toward the parking meter, his expression somewhere between fascination and fear. "What was in the canister?" she asked. Morrison's pause told her everything. "They are not saying." But the CDC people went white when they opened it. They have sealed the whole thing in a containment unit. Word is they are transporting it to a BSL-4 facility for analysis. BSL-4, the highest level of biosafety containment, reserved for agents that posed extreme risk to human life, with no available vaccines or treatments. Sarah thought about all the people who had walked past that parking meter in the days or weeks it had been there, thought about how easily it could have been opened, the contents released into the morning air, carried by the wind through the canyons of Midtown. Who plants a biological weapon in a parking meter, she said, more to herself than to Morrison. Someone who wants to kill a lot of people, or someone who wants to scare someone else. Morrison shook his head. Either way, it is above our pay grade now. Go home, Collins. Get some rest. You and Max did good work today. Sarah nodded, but she did not move. Her eyes had caught something. The parking meter stood in front of a nondescript office building, 12 stories of glass and steel, like dozens of others in the district. But the building's directory, visible through the lobby windows, showed something interesting. Half the floors were listed as vacant, and the occupied floors all belonged to companies with generic names. Southeastern Consulting Partners, Atlantic Strategic Solutions, Pinnacle Advisory Group. Captain, she said slowly, what do we know about that building? Morrison followed her gaze. The federal types were already in there, pulled everyone out for interviews. Why? Just a feeling. Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded. You and your feelings. He pulled out his phone. I will make some calls. Quiet ones. But Collins, if this goes federal, we stay in our lane. Understood. But understanding and accepting were different things. Sarah had learned that lesson long ago. She took Max home to her small house in the Virginia Highland neighborhood, a craftsman bungalow that had seen better decades, but suited her needs perfectly. A fenced backyard for Max, a quiet street for running, neighbors who respected privacy. She filled Max's water bowl, watched him drink deeply, then curl up on his bed with a contented sigh. Good boy, she told him. Rest up. But Sarah did not rest. She opened her laptop and began searching. The building at 1400 Juniper Street was owned by a holding company based in Delaware, one of those corporate shell structures designed to obscure true ownership. The building manager was a property management firm with offices in 6 states. The tenants were a mix of small businesses, most of them less than 3 years old, several of them operating without any visible web presence. Southeastern Consulting Partners had no website, no LinkedIn presence, no Better Business Bureau listing. Their only digital footprint was a registration with the Georgia Secretary of State, showing a formation date of 18 months ago, and a registered agent that was itself another corporate entity. Atlantic Strategic Solutions was similarly ghost-like. Formed 2 years ago, no online presence, registered agent in Nevada. Pinnacle Advisory Group had a website, but it was a template filled with stock photos and vague language about strategic planning and market analysis. No team bios, no client testimonials, no contact information beyond a generic email address. Sarah leaned back in her chair, thinking. 3 companies in the same building, all formed within the past 2 years, all with minimal public presence. Could be legitimate startups operating in stealth mode, could be fronts for something else entirely. Her phone buzzed. A text from Morrison. Fed friends pulled permit records. Building had unauthorized work done 6 months ago. City never approved. Inspector never visited. She typed back, "Who ordered the work?" The response came quickly. "Building management claims they have no record. Fed friends not buying it." Sarah stared at the phone, then looked over at Max. The dog had lifted his head, watching her with the patient intelligence that had made him an exceptional partner. "What did you smell in that meter?" she asked him. "What did you find that nobody else could see?" Max yawned and put his head back down. The answer came the next morning. delivered in a phone call from an FBI special agent named Diana Reyes. Agent Reyes spoke with the clipped efficiency of someone who had given too many difficult briefings. "Lieutenant Collins, we need you at the federal building. Bring your dog." Sarah did not ask why. She knew that demands from the FBI came with explanations attached, or they came with silence, and either way, you showed up. The federal building downtown was a fortress of concrete and security protocols. Sarah and Max passed through 3 checkpoints, surrendered her service weapon, and were escorted to a conference room on the 7th floor, where Agent Reyes waited with a tablet and an expression that suggested she had not slept. The canister contained a modified strain of Yersinia pestis. Reyes said without preamble, "Plague, but engineered, antibiotic-resistant, aerosolized for maximum dispersal." Sarah absorbed the information with the calm of someone who had learned to process horror without letting it show. How bad are we talking? If it had been released in that location, at that time of day with typical wind patterns, the initial exposure zone would have covered approximately 40,000 people. The secondary infection rate, assuming no effective treatment, could have reached into the hundreds of thousands within 2 weeks. The numbers sat in the air between them, incomprehensible in their scale. "Who made it?" Sarah asked. "That is where this becomes complicated." Reyes turned the tablet towards Sarah. On the screen was a photograph of a laboratory, modern and well-equipped. This facility is in Moldova. It was officially closed 3 years ago following an international agreement. Unofficially, we believe it continued operating under new management. New management being who? We do not know. What we do know is that 3 scientists who worked at this facility have disappeared in the past 18 months. 2 of them were specialists in weaponizing bacterial agents. 1 was an expert in aerosol delivery systems. And you think they are in Atlanta. We think someone in Atlanta is connected to whoever is employing them now. The building your dog alerted on, the one at 1400 Juniper. One of the shell companies operating there received wire transfers from a bank in Cyprus that we have linked to the funding network behind that laboratory. Sarah processed this, her mind racing through implications. So this was not random. The location was chosen deliberately. We believe so. Reyes pulled up another image. A corporate organizational chart with boxes and arrows connecting various entities. The web of companies operating out of that building all trace back, through various intermediaries, to a defense contractor called Meridian Defense Systems. I have never heard of them. Most people have not. They operate primarily in the black budget space, classified contracts, sensitive programs, the kind of work that does not appear in press releases. But here is where it gets interesting. Reyes zoomed in on one box in the chart. Meridian's CEO is a man named Victor Harlan, former military intelligence, former CIA, now private sector. And 3 months ago, Harlan had a meeting at that building. We have him on security camera entering the lobby. Sarah studied the image. A man in his 60s, silver hair, expensive suit, the carriage of someone accustomed to power. What was the meeting about? We do not know. But whatever it was, someone decided shortly afterward to plant a biological weapon within sight of the front door, either as a threat, a warning, or a genuine attack that we interrupted. You think Harlan is the target or the perpetrator? That is what we need to find out, and that is where you come in, Lieutenant. Sarah raised an eyebrow. I am Atlanta PD. This seems like federal territory. It is, but we have a problem. Harlan is connected. He has friends in Congress, friends at Langley, friends in places that make it difficult for us to investigate him directly without triggering alarms. We need someone who can work the local angle, someone who has a legitimate reason to be asking questions about a crime that happened in her jurisdiction. You want me to be your cover. I want you to be our partner. Reyes met her eyes directly. Your dog found something that our entire surveillance apparatus missed. That tells me you and he have instincts we could use. And frankly, Lieutenant, after what almost happened yesterday, I am willing to try unconventional approaches." Sarah looked at Max, who sat at her feet with his ears perked, following the conversation as if he understood every word. Maybe he did, in his own way. "What exactly would you need us to do?" Reyes slid a file across the table. "We need you to investigate the security breach at 1400 Juniper. Officially, you are following up on how a device was planted on city property, the parking meter. That gives you jurisdiction, that gives you access. And if you happen to encounter information about the building's tenants, about their business activities, about their connections to a certain defense contractor, well, that would be useful." Sarah opened the file. Inside were photographs, surveillance reports, financial documents. The scope of what Reyes was asking became clear. This was not a simple investigation. This was an operation. "If I find something," she said, "what happens then? You bring it to me, only me, not your captain, not your chief, not anyone else. We have reason to believe that Harlan has sources inside local law enforcement. Until we know who we can trust, this stays between us." Sarah closed the file. "That is a lot of trust to ask for." "It is," Reyes agreed. "But, Lieutenant, if that canister had been opened, if that plague had been released, we would be looking at the worst mass casualty event on American soil since September 11th. Maybe worse. Whoever is behind this, whoever planted that device, they are still out there. They know they failed. And people like that do not just give up. They try again." The weight of those words settled over Sarah like a physical pressure. She thought about the morning commuters she had watched walking past that parking meter, oblivious to what lurked inches from their path, thought about her city, her streets, the people she had sworn to protect. "What do you need me to do first?" Reyes almost smiled. "Start with the permit records. Find out who really ordered that unauthorized work in the building. Follow the trail wherever it leads. And if it leads somewhere dangerous, then you call me, and we reassess." "But, Lieutenant," Reyes leaned forward, her voice dropping, "I need to be clear about something. Victor Harlan is not a man who tolerates interference in his affairs. If he discovers that someone is investigating him, he will respond. And his responses tend to be definitive. Is that a warning or a threat assessment?" "Both." Sarah stood, tucking the file under her arm. Max rose with her, instantly alert. "I will be in touch." She walked out of the federal building into the Atlanta heat, her mind churning with questions. A biological weapon in a parking meter. A shadowy defense contractor. Scientists disappeared from a closed laboratory in Eastern Europe. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a connection that someone had been willing to kill thousands to protect or expose. That thought stopped her mid-stride. She stood on the plaza outside the federal building, pedestrians flowing around her, and considered the possibility that Reyes had not mentioned. What if the device was not meant to kill? What if it was meant to be found? Max pressed against her leg, sensing her tension. She reached down to touch his head, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Come on, boy. We have work to do." The permit office was a fluorescent-lit purgatory of filing cabinets and bureaucratic indifference. Sarah had spent too many hours of her career in places like this, waiting for clerks who moved at geological speed and treated requests for public records like personal affronts. But she had also learned that every bureaucracy had its pressure points. "I need the permit records for 1400 Juniper Street," she told the clerk. A tired-looking woman in her 50s, with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Specifically, any work orders or building modifications in the past year. The clerk looked at her badge, then at Max, then back at the badge. "That is going to take some time to pull." Sarah smiled. "I understand, but this is connected to the incident yesterday, the one that shut down Midtown." The clerk's expression shifted. "Oh, that. My sister works over there. They evacuated her building. She was terrified, I can imagine. The faster we can trace how this happened, the safer everyone will be. The records appeared in 15 minutes. Sarah spread them across a table in a corner of the office, Max lying at her feet, and began to piece together a puzzle that someone had worked hard to hide. The authorized permits for 1400 Juniper were routine. HVAC maintenance, elevator inspections, fire alarm testing, all signed off by licensed contractors, all approved by city inspectors, all perfectly normal. But there was one entry that did not fit. 6 months ago, a permit had been filed for electrical work on the building's exterior. The scope was vague, listed only as meter infrastructure upgrade. The contractor was a company called Coastal Electric Services, and the approving inspector was listed as J. Martinez, badge number 4471. Sarah photographed the document, then called Morrison. "Captain, I need you to check something." "Inspector J. Martinez, badge number 4471. I need to know if that is a real person." Morrison called back in 20 minutes. "No inspector by that name in our system. No badge number matching. Someone falsified the permit. Can we trace the contractor? Coastal Electric Services?" "Already did. Company was formed 5 months before the permit was filed. Dissolved 3 months after. Registered address is a vacant lot in Decatur. A ghost company," Sarah said, "created specifically for this job. Looks that way. Collins, what are you into here?" "I will tell you when I know more." She hung up before Morrison could press further. The trail led next to the Decatur address, a weed-choked lot in an industrial area south of the city proper. Sarah parked across the street and studied the space through her windshield. Nothing there now but broken concrete and rusting debris. But somewhere in the records, this location was listed as the headquarters of a company that had planted a biological weapon in downtown Atlanta. Max whined softly, staring out the window with intensity. "What is it, boy?" She followed his gaze. Across the lot, half hidden by overgrown vegetation, was a shipping container, one of those portable storage units that construction companies used for equipment and supplies. From this distance, it looked abandoned like everything else, but Max's focus suggested otherwise. Sarah got out of the car, clipping Max's leash to her belt. They approached the lot slowly, Sarah's hand resting on her holstered weapon. The container was rusted and weather-beaten, its doors secured with a padlock that had seen better days. But as they got closer, Sarah noticed something. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt nearby. Someone had been here recently. She circled the container, looking for any signs of recent activity. Max stayed close, his nose working constantly, cataloging scents that told a story humans could not read. At the back of the container, Sarah found what Max had been alerting to, a small ventilation unit, the kind used to circulate air in enclosed spaces. It was humming softly, drawing power from a solar panel mounted on the container's roof. Someone was keeping the interior of this abandoned container climate-controlled. She keyed her radio, requesting backup and forensic support. Then she settled in to wait, watching the container with the patience of a predator. The forensic team arrived within the hour. They cut through the padlock and opened the doors, revealing an interior that made Sarah's blood run cold. The container had been converted into a laboratory, crude but functional. A workbench held beakers, tubes, and equipment she did not recognize but suspected was designed for handling dangerous materials. A small refrigeration unit hummed in one corner, and on the walls, pinned like butterflies in a collection, were photographs. Photographs of Atlanta. Street corners, building entrances, transit stations, each one marked with coordinates and notations in a language Sarah did not recognize. "This is a targeting list," she said. The forensic lead, a veteran named Chen, nodded grimly. "Looks like they were scouting locations. The parking meter was just one of multiple planned sites." "How many?" Chen counted the photographs. At least a dozen, maybe more. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Reyes. "You need to get down here. Now." The FBI arrived in force. Within hours, the abandoned lot in Decatur had become a crime scene of federal interest, with evidence techs swarming the container and analysts working to trace every photograph, every piece of equipment, every fingerprint. Reyes found Sarah at the perimeter, watching the controlled chaos with Max at her side. "You found their workshop," Reyes said. "How?" "My dog. He led me here." Reyes looked at Max with new respect. "We owe him a steak. He prefers chicken." A rare smile crossed Reyes's face, then vanished. "The photographs are concerning. If they had multiple devices planted across the city, we could be looking at a coordinated attack." "Could be. We have not found any other devices yet, but that does not mean they are not there." Sarah thought about the parking meter, about how easily it had blended into the urban landscape. How many other hiding places were there in a city of 500,000 people? "We need to sweep the entire city," she said. "Every parking meter, every utility box, every piece of street furniture that could conceal a device." Reyes shook her head. "Do you know how long that would take? How many resources? We would have to shut down the city for days. The panic alone could cause deaths. So what do we do?" Reyes turned to face her directly. "We find out who is behind this before they can execute their plan, and we stop them." Easier said than done. "That is why we need to move fast. The photographs have coordinates. We are cross-referencing them now. If we can identify the pattern, maybe we can predict their next target. And Harlan? Still our best lead, but we cannot approach him directly. Not yet. We need evidence that connects him to this operation." Sarah looked back at the container, at the laboratory where someone had refined death into a deliverable package. "I might have an idea." The idea was risky, bordering on reckless, but Reyes agreed that conventional approaches were not working. That night, Sarah and Max positioned themselves outside the Meridian Defense Systems headquarters, a glass tower in Buckhead that radiated corporate prosperity. Security was tight. Multiple checkpoints, armed guards, the kind of infrastructure that suggested the company had something worth protecting. But every fortress had weak points, and Sarah had spent her career finding them. She watched the building for 3 hours, cataloging shift changes, camera positions, patrol patterns. Max sat beside her in the unmarked car, his eyes tracking movement with the same attention to detail. At 11 o'clock, a service van arrived at the loading dock. The driver showed credentials to the guard, waited while the gate was raised, then pulled into the underground garage. Security swept the van, found nothing suspicious, and waved it through. Standard delivery protocol. But Sarah had noticed something. The guard who checked the van spent more time chatting with the driver than actually inspecting the vehicle. Either they knew each other, or the guard had been paid to look the other way. She made a note and continued watching. At midnight, a black SUV emerged from the garage, tinted windows, government plates. Sarah memorized the license number and watched it head south on Peachtree. The next morning, she ran the plates through a contact at DMV. The SUV was registered to a federal motor pool, which meant someone in the federal government was visiting Meridian Defense Systems at midnight, officially or otherwise. She called Reyes. "Does the FBI have anyone surveilling Meridian?" "Not officially." "Why?" "Because someone is, or someone is meeting with them using federal vehicles." Reyes was quiet for a long moment. "I will look into it. But Collins, be careful. If there are federal assets involved in this, we could be stepping into something much bigger than a biological attack. Bigger than a plague? Bigger than you can imagine." The warning lingered in Sarah's mind as she continued her investigation. Over the next 3 days, she and Max worked the margins of the case, following threads that official investigators could not or would not pursue. The scientists from Moldova, that was the next lead. If they were in Atlanta, they needed housing, supplies, equipment. They needed a support network, and support networks left traces. Sarah started with the scientific community. Atlanta had several major research institutions, any of which might have noticed unusual activity in their fields. She made calls to contacts in the CDC, in Emory's virology department, in private laboratories throughout the city. She asked careful questions about unusual equipment purchases, about unfamiliar researchers asking for access, about anything out of the ordinary. The break came from an unexpected source, a veterinarian named Dr. Marcus Webb, who ran a clinic in Decatur that specialized in exotic animals. Webb called Sarah's precinct, out specifically for the officer with the Belgian Malinois, and when Sarah returned the call, he told her something interesting. About 3 months ago, someone came into my clinic asking about ferrets, not as pets. They wanted to know about their respiratory systems, their susceptibility to certain pathogens, very technical questions, medical questions, not pet owner questions. Did you get a name? Just a first name, Pavel. Thick accent, maybe Eastern European. Paid cash. Seemed nervous. Sarah felt adrenaline spike through her veins. Can you describe him? 50s, grey hair, thin build. Had a scar on his left hand like an old burn. It matched the description of Pavel Kirillov, one of the missing scientists from the Moldovan laboratory. Sarah thanked Webb and immediately called Reyes. The FBI ran with the lead. Within 48 hours, they had traced Kirillov to a rental house in Conyers, 30 miles east of Atlanta. A surveillance team confirmed his presence along with 2 other individuals matching the descriptions of the other missing scientists. But Reyes held off on a raid. We need to catch them with evidence. Something that connects them to the devices, to the operation, to Harlan. How do we do that? We wait. We watch. And we hope they make a mistake. Sarah hated waiting. Max hated it too. They were both creatures of action, built for movement and pursuit. But she understood the logic. Moving too fast could spook the targets into destroying evidence or fleeing the jurisdiction. They needed to be patient. The patience paid off on a Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after Max had first alerted on the parking meter. Sarah was catching up on paperwork at her desk when her phone buzzed with a text from Reyes. Targets on the move, heading into the city. Follow discreetly. She grabbed Max and was in her car within minutes, receiving coordinates via secure channel. The scientists were traveling in a white van, taking surface streets to avoid traffic cameras on the highways. They were being careful, but not careful enough. Sarah followed at a distance, using Max's visual to track the van while she stayed several cars back. The van wound through East Atlanta, crossed into Grant Park, then turned north toward downtown, and stopped at 1400 Juniper Street. Sarah parked half a block away and watched through binoculars as the 3 scientists exited the van and entered the building through a side door. A door that should have been secured, that should have triggered alarms, that should have brought building security running. None of that happened. She reported the observation to Reyes. 10 minutes later, her phone rang. "We are moving." Reyes sounded tense. "SWAT is en route, but Collins, we need you inside. The scientists know your face would not be familiar. If they see FBI jackets, they might destroy evidence. But a local cop following up on a building security issue, that might buy us time. You want me to go in alone, you and your dog, just long enough to contain the scene until backup arrives?" Sarah looked at Max. The dog's eyes were bright, eager. He knew something was happening. "We are on our way." The building's lobby was empty. The elevators hummed with distant activity. Sarah moved to the stairwell, Max silent at her side, and began climbing. The scientists had been seen entering through a side door that led to the 3rd floor. That floor was listed as occupied by Atlantic Strategic Solutions, one of the ghost companies she had identified earlier. Sarah climbed quietly, her weapon drawn, Max's leash wrapped around her left hand. At the 3rd floor landing, she paused to listen. Voices drifted from somewhere down the hall. Male, speaking in a language she did not understand, Russian maybe, or something Slavic. She eased the door open and stepped into the corridor. The hallway was standard corporate office, carpeted floors, fluorescent lights, rows of identical doors. Most were closed. One, at the far end, stood slightly ajar. Light spilled through the gap, and the voices grew louder. Sarah moved down the hall in a tactical crouch, Max matching her pace step for step. They passed empty offices, conference rooms filled with dust, a break room that looked like it had not been used in months. The building was a shell, a facade behind which something else was operating. 10 feet from the open door, Max stopped. The same alert posture as before, rigid, focused, absolutely certain. Sarah's heart hammered. She knew what that meant. She keyed her radio to whisper mode. Reyes, possible device on 3rd floor. Max is alerting. Copy. SWAT is 2 minutes out. Can you identify the device? Sarah edged closer to the door and peered through the gap. The room beyond was a large open office space that had been converted into something else entirely. Tables covered with equipment, monitors displaying maps and schematics. And in the center of the room, 3 men in lab coats working over a cylindrical device that looked terrifyingly similar to what had been found in the parking meter. One of them looked up and saw her. For a frozen instant, nobody moved. Then everything happened at once. The scientist shouted something in Russian. One of his colleagues lunged for the device. The third pulled a gun from somewhere and fired. Sarah dove for cover, pulling Max with her. Bullets punched through the drywall above her head. She returned fire, 2 controlled shots that drove the gunman back behind a table. "Atlanta PD," she shouted. "Drop your weapons and step away from the device." The answer was more gunfire. Sarah assessed her position. Bad cover, limited angles, 3 hostiles with at least 1 armed. And somewhere in that room was a weapon capable of killing thousands. Max whined, pressing against her. His eyes were fixed on the doorway, body trembling with the urge to act. "Easy, boy, easy!" She heard running footsteps from the stairwell. SWAT was coming. She just needed to hold position long enough for them to arrive. But then she heard something else. A high-pitched beeping from inside the room, and one of the scientists shouting what sounded like a countdown. They were arming the device. Sarah made a decision in the space of a heartbeat. She unclipped Max's leash. "Max, take." The Malinois exploded through the doorway like a furry missile. 65 pounds of muscle, teeth, and training aimed at the nearest threat. Sarah followed a second later, low and fast, her weapon up. Max hit the gunman before he could react, jaws clamping on the man's forearm with the force of an industrial vice. The gun clattered to the floor. Sarah kicked it away and turned to face the other 2 scientists. "Step away from the device, now!" One of them, the one Reyes had identified as Pavel Kirillov, looked at her with something like resignation. "It is too late," he said, his English heavily accented. "The timer is set." "Then unset it." "I cannot. Only one person has the code." "Who?" Kirillov smiled, a bitter expression. "The man who pays for everything. The man who will watch this city burn and blame it on his enemies." Harlan. The name hung in the air. Kirillov's smile faded. "You know him." "I know what he is." Sarah's radio crackled. SWAT was entering the building 30 seconds out. She looked at the device, at the red numbers counting down on its display. 4 minutes and change. "Help me stop this," she said to Kirillov. "Whatever you think you are accomplishing, killing 500,000 people will not change anything." The scientist stared at her, something shifting in his eyes. For a long moment, Sarah thought he would refuse. Then he moved to the device, his hands shaking. "I can slow it down, buy time, but the code is biometric. Only Harlan's fingerprint can stop the countdown. Then we need to find Harlan." SWAT burst through the door, black-clad operators spreading through the room with practiced efficiency. Sarah held up her badge, identified herself, and pointed to the device. "We have a live weapon with a 4-minute timer. We need EOD, and we need the FBI to find Victor Harlan right now." The next 3 minutes were controlled chaos. Nakamura arrived with his team, studied the device, and confirmed what Kirillov had said. The trigger mechanism was sophisticated, protected by biometric locks that could not be bypassed without extensive time they did not have. Reyes coordinated via phone, her voice tight with urgency. "We are tracking Harlan's phone. He is at his office in Buckhead. Get him here. We cannot. Not legally. We do not have enough evidence to detain him." Sarah looked at the countdown. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Then we get creative. She grabbed Kirillov by the arm. "You helped design this thing. There has to be a way to disable it without the code." The scientist shook his head. It was designed to be unstoppable. Harlan wanted a weapon that could not be recalled, could not be negotiated. Then why did he give himself the ability to stop it? Insurance, in case something went wrong with the deployment. He never expected anyone to find it before detonation. Sarah's mind raced. Harlan had built in a failsafe because he wanted control, which meant somewhere, somehow, there was a way to reach him, to force his hand. Does he know the device was found? Kirillov hesitated. "He would have been notified when we came here. The building has his security systems, so he knows we are here. He knows the device is active. And he knows that in about 2 minutes his biological weapon is going to detonate in a building connected to his company." Yes. Sarah looked at Reyes, who had arrived on scene looking like she had run the whole way from her car. If Harlan lets this device go off, he loses his connection. The building, the shell companies, everything that links him to this operation gets vaporized along with half of Midtown. Reyes caught her meaning. He might stop it himself, to protect himself, only if he thinks he can get away clean afterward. Sarah turned to the nearest FBI tech. "Get me a direct line to Victor Harlan. Now!" The tech looked at Reyes, who nodded sharply. 30 seconds later, Sarah was holding a phone with a connection to Meridian Defense Systems headquarters. "This is Victor Harlan," said the voice on the other end, smooth and confident. "Who is this?" "Lieutenant Sarah Collins, Atlanta Police Department. I am standing in front of your biological weapon, Mr. Harlan, the one that is about to detonate in 90 seconds. Silence on the line. Then, "I do not know what you're talking about. Your fingerprint is the only thing that can stop the countdown, which means if this device goes off, you are directly responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Your scientists have already been arrested. They are telling us everything. The only question now is whether you add mass murder to your list of charges." More silence. Sarah watched the countdown tick below, 60 seconds. "You are bluffing," Harlan said finally. "There is no device. This is some kind of entrapment scheme. 45 seconds, Mr. Harlan. I'm looking at it right now. And when it goes off, the forensic team will trace every component back to your laboratory, your contractors, your money. There will be no way to hide what you have done." The countdown hit 30 seconds. Sarah felt sweat running down her back. Max pressed against her leg, sensing her fear. 15 seconds. "Stop," Harlan said suddenly. "I am sending the kill code now." A notification appeared on the device's display. Biometric authorization received. The countdown froze at 7 seconds. Then the display went dark. Sarah let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Around her, the SWAT team and EOD techs stood in stunned silence. She lifted the phone again. "Victor Harlan, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit terrorism, possession of weapons of mass destruction, and attempted mass murder. Federal agents are on their way to your location now. Do not attempt to leave." She hung up before he could respond. Reyes appeared at her shoulder, her face a mix of relief and disbelief. "I cannot believe that worked. Neither can I." The aftermath stretched over weeks. Victor Harlan was arrested, along with 15 associates, in a coordinated operation that made national headlines. The biological weapon was safely contained and transported to a CDC facility for study. The scientists from Moldova were taken into federal custody, where they provided testimony that unraveled a conspiracy spanning 3 continents. The investigation revealed that Harlan had been running an unauthorized biological weapons program for years, using his defense contracts as cover and his network of shell companies to funnel resources. The attack on Atlanta was intended to demonstrate the weapon's capabilities to potential buyers, a sales pitch written in corpses. Sarah testified before a grand jury, her account of the events corroborated by forensic evidence and witness statements. Reyes submitted a commendation to the Atlanta Police Department, praising Lieutenant Collins and K-9 Max for actions that had prevented a catastrophic attack. But the commendation sat in a file somewhere, unread and unacknowledged. Sarah did not need recognition. She had something better. On a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the crisis ended, she took Max to Piedmont Park. The autumn air was crisp and clean, the trees beginning to turn gold and red. Families spread blankets on the grass, children ran through the leaves. The city went about its business, oblivious to how close it had come to destruction. Sarah threw a ball across the open field and watched Max sprint after it, his joy pure and uncomplicated. He caught the ball on the bounce, wheeled around, and raced back to her with his tail wagging. "Good boy," she said, kneeling to accept his triumphant delivery. "Good boy." Max dropped the ball at her feet and looked up at her with bright eyes, ready to go again, ready for whatever came next. Sarah smiled and threw the ball again. Somewhere across the city, in a federal detention center, Victor Harlan was discovering that money and connections could not buy his way out of every problem. The scientists he had employed were cooperating fully with investigators, providing details about other operations, other clients, other weapons that had been sold to the highest bidder. The web was unraveling. And Sarah knew that more threats would emerge from the shadows, more challenges that would test her resolve and her partnership with Max. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today, there was only the park, the ball, and a dog who had saved a city by doing what he did best, trusting his nose. The Monday after the park visit brought new complications. Sarah had expected a return to normal patrol duties, the kind of routine work that kept her grounded after high-intensity operations. Instead, she found a message from Captain Morrison waiting on her desk. Conference room. 10 minutes, no dog. That last instruction raised her hackles. Max was her partner. Excluding him from a meeting suggested something political was happening, the kind of interdepartmental maneuvering that she had always despised. She left Max with a trusted colleague in the K-9 unit and walked to the conference room with her guard up. Morrison was not alone. Sitting across from him was a woman Sarah did not recognize. Mid-40s, grey suit, the kind of deliberately neutral expression that screamed federal bureaucrat. "Lieutenant Collins," Morrison said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Have a seat." Sarah sat, keeping her posture relaxed but her mind alert. "This is Agent Patricia Welch," Morrison continued, Department of Justice. Welch offered a thin smile that did not reach her eyes. "Lieutenant Collins, your recent work has attracted attention." "Good attention or bad attention?" "Both, actually." Sarah waited. Welch opened a folder on the table between them. "What you accomplished with the Harlan case was impressive. You identified a biological threat, traced it to its source, and helped neutralize it before it could be deployed. The Bureau is grateful for your assistance, but your methods were unorthodox. You operated outside your jurisdiction on multiple occasions. You conducted surveillance without proper authorization, and you directly contacted a suspect in an ongoing federal investigation without coordinating with the lead agents. Agent Reyes authorized my involvement." Agent Reyes exceeded her authority. Welch's tone remained level, almost pleasant, which is why she is currently on administrative leave pending review. Sarah felt anger flare but kept it from her face. Agent Reyes saved this city. Agent Reyes allowed a local police officer to insert herself into a federal operation without proper oversight. Whatever her intentions, she created significant legal complications for the prosecution. The anger built, pressing against Sarah's control. Are you telling me that stopping a biological attack was wrong? I am telling you that how you stop something matters as much as stopping it. Welch closed the folder. The evidence you gathered is being challenged by Harlan's defense team. They are arguing that it was obtained illegally, that your involvement tainted the chain of custody, that the entire operation was a violation of their client's rights. That is absurd. It is legal strategy. And unfortunately, it may work. Welch stood, smoothing her jacket. The Department of Justice is committed to prosecuting Victor Harlan to the fullest extent of the law. But we need clean evidence properly obtained through proper channels. What we have now is compromised. Sarah stood as well, facing Welch directly. So what happens next? Next, you return to your regular duties and stay away from this case. If we need your testimony, we will call you. Otherwise, your involvement is concluded. Welch headed for the door, then paused. For what it is worth, Lieutenant, I do not doubt your intentions, but good intentions do not win court cases. She left. Morrison remained seated, watching Sarah with the weary expression of a man caught between forces he could not control. Politics, he said simply. You kicked a hornet's nest. I did my job. You did more than your job. And now other people have to clean up the mess. He stood, moving toward the door himself. Take a few days off, Collins. Let things settle down. Captain. He paused. Sarah met his eyes. If they let Harlan walk, there will be another attack. Maybe not here, maybe not soon, but he will not stop. Morrison held her gaze for a long moment. I know, but some fights you cannot win by fighting harder. Sometimes you have to be smarter. He left her alone in the conference room with her frustration and her fury. The days off became a week. Sarah spent it training with Max, running in the mornings, reviewing case files in the afternoons. She could not let go of the Harlan investigation, even though she had been explicitly ordered to do so. The evidence was good. She had seen it herself. The forensics tied the biological agent to the Moldovan laboratory. The financial records traced money from Harlan's companies to the shell corporations in the Juniper Street building. The testimony of the scientists placed Harlan at the center of the conspiracy. But Welch was right about one thing. The defense was attacking the process, not the facts. They were arguing that Sarah's involvement had contaminated everything, that the FBI's reliance on a local officer had violated Harlan's rights to due process. It was infuriating, and it was working. News reports began appearing about problems with the prosecution. Anonymous sources suggested that key evidence might be excluded. Legal analysts speculated about the possibility of a mistrial. Sarah watched the coverage with growing despair. She had risked everything to stop Harlan, and now lawyers were dismantling her work with motions and objections. On the 8th day of her enforced vacation, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered anyway. Collins, Lieutenant. A familiar voice, tired but determined. It is Reyes. I heard you were suspended. Administrative leave. Not quite the same thing. There was noise in the background, traffic sounds, the ambient chaos of a public space. I need to meet with you. Somewhere private. Can you come to Grant Park, by the lake, in 1 hour? Sarah hesitated. This felt wrong. Reyes was under investigation. Meeting with her could be seen as collusion, could add fuel to the defense's arguments about improper coordination. But Reyes had trusted her when no one else would, had given her the chance to make a difference. I will be there. Grant Park was quiet at 3 in the afternoon, most visitors gone home for the day. Sarah found Reyes sitting on a bench near the lake, looking out at the water with an expression that suggested she was seeing something far away. Max trotted up to her, tail wagging. and Reyes managed a small smile as she scratched behind his ears. "Good boy," she murmured. "You started all of this, you know. One alert on one parking meter." Sarah sat beside her, keeping her voice low. "What is happening? The prosecution is falling apart." Reyes did not look at her, kept her eyes on the water. "Harlan's lawyers are good, the best money can buy. They have found every weak point in our case and are exploiting them ruthlessly. Welch told me. Welch is part of the problem. She is more concerned with protecting the department's reputation than with putting Harlan away." Reyes finally turned to face Sarah. "But there is something she does not know, something I kept out of the official reports." "What?" "When we raided the safe house in Conyers, we recovered computers. Most of the data was encrypted, but our tech people managed to crack some of it. They found communications between Harlan and his buyers." "Buyers?" "The biological weapon was not just a demonstration, it was a product. Harlan had already sold 3 devices to foreign governments. They have been deployed to 3 different cities around the world." Sarah felt cold despite the mild afternoon. "Where?" "London, Tokyo, São Paulo. Each device is identical to the one we found here. Each one is waiting for activation. Why is this not in the official reports? Because if it becomes public, the panic could trigger the attacks. Whoever has those devices would know we are onto them. They might decide to use them before we can find them. So what do we do?" Reyes reached into her jacket and pulled out a flash drive. "This contains everything we know about the devices, their locations, their activation protocols. And it contains evidence that directly ties Harlan to the sales. Evidence that was obtained through proper channels, evidence that even Welch cannot dismiss. Then give it to the prosecution." "I cannot." Reyes's expression was pained. "If I come forward now, it looks like I am trying to rehabilitate my own position. The defense will argue that I fabricated the evidence to save my career. But if someone else brings it to light, someone with no stake in the federal case." Sarah understood. "You want me to leak this? I want you to make sure justice is done. The method is up to you." Sarah took the flash drive, feeling its weight in her palm. "If I do this, my career is over. Maybe, or maybe you save 3 cities from the same fate Atlanta almost suffered." Reyes stood, looking down at Sarah with something like respect. "You are a good cop, Collins. Better than most. But sometimes being good is not enough. Sometimes you have to be willing to break the rules to do what is right." She walked away, leaving Sarah alone with the flash drive and the impossible choice it represented. That night, Sarah sat in her living room with Max at her feet and the flash drive on the table in front of her. The decision weighed on her like a physical burden. If she leaked the evidence, she would be violating direct orders. She would be compromising an ongoing investigation. She would be ending her career in law enforcement. But if she did nothing, 3 cities could face biological attacks, thousands of people could die, and Victor Harlan might walk free. She thought about all the choices that had led her to this moment. The years of training, the cases solved, the criminals brought to justice. She had built her life around the belief that the system worked, that following the rules led to right outcomes. But the system was failing. The rules were protecting a monster. Max lifted his head, sensing her distress. His brown eyes found hers, offering wordless comfort. "What do you think, boy?" Max's tail thumped against the floor. Whatever she decided, he would be with her. Sarah picked up the flash drive. The next morning, she drove to the offices of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She had chosen her contact carefully, a reporter named James Chen, who had covered law enforcement for 20 years and had a reputation for protecting his sources. Chen met her in a coffee shop across the street from the newspaper building. He was a small man with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of journalist who listened more than he talked. Sarah slid the flash drive across the table. This is evidence related to the Victor Harlan case. It shows that he sold biological weapons to foreign governments. 3 devices are currently deployed in other cities. Chen did not touch the drive. He studied Sarah's face instead. Why are you bringing this to me? Because the official channels are failing. The prosecution is being undermined. If this evidence does not come out, Harlan walks and those weapons remain in place. Do you understand what happens if I publish this? I understand. Your career, your pension, everything you have worked for. Sarah pushed the drive closer to him. Some things are more important than careers. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the drive and slipped it into his pocket. Give me 48 hours. I need to verify this independently before I can use it. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Chen stood, dropping a bill on the table for his coffee. If this goes wrong, we both burn. The story broke 2 days later. Front page of the AJC, above the fold, with Chen's byline and a headline that sent shockwaves through the legal community. Evidence reveals Harlan sold bioweapons to foreign powers. The article detailed the sales, the locations of the deployed devices, and the communications that proved Harlan's direct involvement. It cited anonymous sources within law enforcement and included photographs of documents that left no room for doubt. Within hours, the international community was in an uproar. Emergency teams were dispatched to London, Tokyo, and São Paulo. 2 of the 3 devices were recovered safely. The third, in São Paulo, had been moved by its handlers, but Brazilian authorities tracked it to a warehouse in the favelas and neutralized it before it could be activated. Harlan's defense team scrambled to respond, but the new evidence changed everything. The public outcry made it impossible to argue technicalities. The judge denied the motion to dismiss. The trial would proceed, and Sarah's career, as she had predicted, was over. The internal investigation was swift and brutal. Within a week, she had been suspended pending review. Within a month, she had been offered a choice: resign quietly or face formal termination for insubordination and unauthorized disclosure of classified information. She chose resignation. On her last day at the precinct, Captain Morrison found her cleaning out her desk. His face showed the complicated mix of emotions that defined their relationship: respect, frustration, and something that might have been sorrow. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "That and $5 will get me a cup of coffee. The FBI wants to talk to you." Sarah paused, a photograph in her hand, a younger version of herself, standing with Max at their graduation from K-9 training. "What about?" "They are not saying. But Agent Reyes is back on duty. Promoted, actually. Whatever you did, it cleared her too." Sarah put the photograph in her box. "I'm glad something good came out of this." Morrison hesitated, then extended his hand. "For what it is worth, Collins, you are one of the best officers I have ever worked with. The department's loss." She shook his hand. "Take care of the unit, Captain." The FBI meeting happened 3 days later, in a different conference room in a different building. Agent Reyes was there, looking healthier than the last time they had met, along with 3 other agents Sarah did not recognize. "Lieutenant Collins," Reyes began, then stopped herself. "Forgive me. Just Ms. Collins now. Just Sarah is fine." Reyes nodded. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. I put you in an impossible position, and you paid the price for my decision. You gave me a choice. I made it. Still, what you did, leaking that evidence, it saved lives, maybe hundreds of thousands of lives, and it put a war criminal behind bars. That matters." Sarah shrugged. "So why am I here? If this is a thank you, you could have sent a card." One of the other agents, an older man with silver hair and the bearing of someone used to command, leaned forward. "Ms. Collins, my name is Director William Ashford. I oversee certain special operations within the Bureau. What you accomplished with the Harlan case was remarkable, but what interests me more is how you accomplished it. I had help. You had a dog. Ashford smiled slightly. And your instincts, and a willingness to operate outside conventional boundaries when those boundaries failed to serve justice. I broke the law. You bent it. There is a difference, and sometimes bending the law is the only way to fix what is broken. Sarah studied him, trying to read the angle. What are you offering? A job. Ashford slid a folder across the table. Not with the FBI, officially. We have a special task force, outside normal channels, that handles situations conventional agencies cannot. Cases where the rules do not apply. Threats that require unconventional responses. Sounds illegal, sounds necessary. We operate with authorization from the highest levels. What we do is sanctioned, even if it is not public, and we need people like you. People with skills, instincts, and the willingness to do what must be done. Sarah opened the folder. Inside were documents describing an organization she had never heard of, with a mandate that covered everything from counter-terrorism to corporate espionage, to threats that did not fit neatly into any category. Why me? Because you found a biological weapon in a parking meter. Because you traced it to its source when our entire surveillance apparatus missed it. Because when the system failed, you found another way. Ashford's eyes were steady, unreadable. We need people who can see what others miss, and we need a good dog. Sarah looked up sharply. Max? He is part of the package. We have reviewed his service record. Remarkable animal. We have resources that could extend his working life considerably. Better training, better equipment, better medical care. He could continue serving for years. Sarah thought about Max, about the partnership they had built, about the bond that went deeper than training or duty. He had trusted her through every case, every chase, every moment of danger. Could she ask him to continue into something even more uncertain? But she also knew what the alternative was. Retirement, a quiet life, watching from the sidelines while threats emerged and others fought to stop them. That was not who she was. That was not who Max was. She closed the folder. When do we start? The transition took 3 weeks. Sarah was briefed on protocols, introduced to team members, and given access to resources that made her previous equipment look like toys. Max underwent evaluation by specialists who declared him exceptional, then fitted him with new tactical gear that integrated communication technology and biometric monitoring. Their first assignment came on a rainy November morning. Fitting, Sarah thought, since rain had been absent from the story that started it all. The briefing was terse. A shipping container had been flagged by port security in Savannah. Radiation signature. Possible nuclear material. Local authorities were overwhelmed. The task force was deploying. Sarah and Max rode in a helicopter with 3 other operatives, all of them silent, focused, ready. The coast slid by below them, grey water and grey sky merging at the horizon. She thought about how far she had come from that Tuesday morning in Midtown, a parking meter that should have been nothing, a dog's alert that should have been routine, and a chain of events that had changed everything. The helicopter began its descent toward Savannah. Max pressed against her leg, ready for whatever came next. Sarah scratched behind his ears and smiled. Let us go to work. The shipping container sat among thousands of others in the vast maze of the port of Savannah, a metal rectangle that looked identical to its neighbors. But the Geiger counter in the port security officer's hand told a different story. Sarah and Max approached with the team, spreading out to cover multiple angles. The container had been isolated, moved to a secure area away from the main cargo operations. Port workers had been evacuated. A perimeter had been established. Standard protocol for a potential nuclear threat. Max's nose was working overtime, processing the complex stew of scents that permeated the port: salt water, diesel fuel, rust, rubber, and underneath it all, something else. something that made him alert. Sarah watched him carefully. The new tactical vest he wore included sensors that monitored his heart rate, breathing, and movement patterns. The data streamed to her phone, allowing her to track his responses in real time. His heart rate was elevated. His breathing had quickened. Whatever was in that container, Max knew it was dangerous. Collins. The voice came through her earpiece. Ashford, monitoring from the command center. "What is your doggy's read? He is alerting. Something in there he does not like." The portable X-ray had already been deployed, revealing the contents of the container. Crates stacked floor to ceiling. Most appeared to contain machinery parts, consistent with the manifest that claimed the shipment was industrial equipment bound for a factory in Tennessee. But one crate, near the back of the container, showed something different. A dense object, roughly spherical, surrounded by what looked like lead shielding. The shape and configuration were unmistakable to anyone who had studied nuclear weapons. "We have a device," the team leader reported. "Possible nuclear warhead, requesting EOD and NRC liaison." Sarah felt the familiar cold that came with extreme danger. A biological weapon had been terrible enough, but nuclear material represented a different scale of threat entirely. She knelt beside Max, keeping her voice calm. "Good boy. Stay with me." The wait for the nuclear response team stretched past an hour. Sarah used the time to study the shipping documents that had been pulled from the port's database. The container had originated in Eastern Europe, passed through several intermediary ports, and arrived in Savannah 3 days ago. The receiving company was a firm called Tennessee Industrial Partners, registered address in Nashville. A quick database search revealed that Tennessee Industrial Partners had been formed 18 months ago. No website, no public presence, a registered agent that was another corporate entity. The pattern was familiar. She reported her findings to Ashford. "So this looks similar to the shell company structure we saw in the Harlan case. I noticed that too." Ashford's voice was thoughtful. "We are pulling records now. If there is a connection, we will find it." The nuclear response team arrived by convoy, bringing specialized equipment and personnel trained for exactly this scenario. They worked with methodical precision, opening the container under controlled conditions, photographing everything, cataloging every item. When they reached the suspicious crate, the lead technician's voice came through the radio with studied calm. "Confirming presence of fissile material. Appears to be a crude nuclear device, not military grade, but potentially viable. Can you disarm it?" "Working on it." The next 30 minutes were the longest of Sarah's life. She stayed at the perimeter with Max, watching the technicians work through the container's open doors. Every protocol was followed, every precaution taken, and still the possibility of catastrophic failure hung in the air like a physical presence. Finally, the lead technician emerged, his face pale but relieved. "Device is disabled. We will need to transport it to a secure facility for full analysis." Sarah let out a breath. Good work, but the work was not done. While the nuclear team handled the device, Sarah and the rest of the task force focused on the trail. Who had sent the weapon? Who was supposed to receive it? And how did it connect to the network they had thought was dismantled with Harlan's arrest? The answers came slowly, pieced together from shipping records, financial transactions, and intelligence reports from partner agencies around the world. Tennessee Industrial Partners was not connected to Harlan's network. It was something worse, a new player, or perhaps an old one that had remained hidden until now. The trail led through a maze of intermediaries to a figure known in intelligence circles only as the Architect. The Architect was a ghost. No confirmed photograph, no real name. A reputation built on decades of facilitating the impossible, moving weapons, money, and people across borders that should have been impenetrable. And now the architect had tried to bring a nuclear device into the United States. Sarah studied the intelligence files with growing unease. This was not a single threat to be neutralized. This was an entire network, spanning continents, with resources and capabilities that dwarfed anything she had faced before. But they had found one thread, one container, one device. That was how you unraveled a network, one thread at a time. "Sir," she said to Ashford during the briefing that followed, "I want to pursue the architect. That is a significant undertaking. The architect has evaded every agency that has tried to find them. They have not tried with me and Max." Ashford studied her for a long moment. "Your dog found a biological weapon in a parking meter and a nuclear device in a shipping container. You think he can find a ghost?" "I think he can find the people who work for the ghost, and they can lead us to the rest." Ashford nodded slowly. "Then start pulling threads." The investigation consumed the next 3 months. Sarah and Max traveled to 7 countries, following leads that sometimes panned out and sometimes led nowhere. They interviewed sources, analyzed documents, and built a picture of an organization that operated like a shadow cast by the legitimate world. The architect's network moved weapons, yes, but also information, influence, and people. They facilitated coups and corporate takeovers, smuggled dissidents out of authoritarian states and intelligence assets into democracies. They were not ideological, they were professional. They served whoever could pay their price. And their price, Sarah learned, was very high indeed. The break came in Singapore. An informant, a former employee of one of the architect's front companies, agreed to meet in exchange for protection and a new identity. His name was David Liu, and he had managed logistics for 10 years before his conscience finally caught up with his ambitions. "They call him the architect because he designs systems," Liu explained. They sat in a hotel room with blackout curtains and white noise generators, every possible precaution against surveillance. Not just smuggling routes or financial structures, entire ecosystems of influence. He sees how power flows through a society and builds channels to redirect it. Has anyone ever seen him? Liu shook his head. "I never did. Everything was done through intermediaries, but I heard things, rumors. They say he was intelligence once, American, British, maybe Israeli. Someone who understood how the game was played and decided to play it for himself. How do we find him?" Liu hesitated. "There is a meeting. Once a year, the senior people in the network gather to receive instructions and divide territories. I do not know where it happens, but I know when. The winter solstice, every year on the winter solstice." That was 3 weeks away. Liu continued. "There is one person who might know the location. Her name is Anya Volkov. She was his first recruit 30 years ago. She runs the European operations. If anyone knows where the meeting happens, it is her. Where do we find Volkov?" Liu provided an address in Prague, a restaurant she frequented, a schedule she kept with mechanical precision. Sarah thanked him, arranged for his extraction, and began planning the next phase. Prague in December was cold and beautiful. Snow dusted the ancient rooftops and turned the Charles Bridge into a postcard. Sarah and Max arrived as tourists, complete with guidebooks and cameras that concealed surveillance equipment. Anya Volkov was not what Sarah expected. The intelligence files described a ruthless operator with a body count measured in dozens. What Sarah found was an elegant woman in her 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, who moved through the streets of Prague with the confidence of someone who owned them. Surveillance was delicate. Volkov had survived 30 years in a business that killed the careless. She would spot obvious tactics instantly, but she would not spot a dog. Sarah positioned herself at a cafe across from Volkov's restaurant, Max at her feet. To observers, she was a tourist resting after a morning of sightseeing, to the sensors embedded in Max's vest. She was collecting data on every person who entered or exited the building. Volkov arrived precisely at noon. She ate alone, reading from a tablet, paying no attention to the other diners. After an hour, she left, walking north toward the old town square. Max and Sarah followed at a distance. The pursuit lasted 3 days. Sarah mapped Volkov's routines, identified her security measures, and looked for vulnerabilities. There were few. The woman was careful to the point of paranoia. But on the third night, something changed. Volkov left her apartment at an unusual hour, 2 in the morning, and drove to the outskirts of the city. Sarah followed in a rental car, Max alert in the back seat. The destination was a private airfield, the kind used by corporate jets and wealthy travelers who valued discretion. Volkov's car pulled through a security gate and stopped beside a waiting aircraft. Sarah parked at a distance and used her camera to photograph everything. The plane's tail number, the ground crew loading luggage, and the figure who emerged to greet Volkov, a man, tall and thin, dressed in an impeccable suit despite the late hour. His face was obscured by the darkness, but his bearing suggested authority, command, power. Could that be him? The architect himself? Sarah captured what images she could, then watched as Volkov and the man boarded the plane. Within minutes it was taxiing for takeoff. She called Ashford. Target is mobile, private aircraft, departing Prague. I need tracking authorization. Already on it. We have assets in the air. The plane's trajectory took it south, over Austria and Italy, finally landing at a private strip in the mountains of Switzerland. Sarah was on a commercial flight within hours, arriving in Geneva as dawn broke over the Alps. The Swiss location was a chalet, remote and heavily secured. Satellite imagery showed walls, guards, electronic countermeasures. Getting inside would require resources beyond what Sarah had available. But she did not need to get inside. She just needed to know who was there. For 5 days she watched the chalet through long-range optics. Vehicles came and went. People arrived, stayed briefly, departed. She photographed every face, ran every image through recognition databases, built a roster of the architect's inner circle. And then, on the winter solstice, they all arrived at once. 16 people from 12 countries representing the leadership of a network that spanned the globe. Drug traffickers and arms dealers, intelligence brokers and money launderers. The royalty of the criminal underworld gathered in one place. Sarah reported to Ashford, "Sir, I have visual confirmation of the meeting. 16 attendees, all high-value targets, requesting tactical authorization." Ashford's response was immediate, negative. "Swiss authorities will not sanction an operation on their soil. We are working diplomatic channels, but it will take time. They will be gone by then, I understand, but we cannot operate without authorization." The political fallout would be catastrophic. Sarah watched the chalet through her scope, frustration burning in her chest. 16 of the most dangerous criminals in the world, all within reach, and she could not touch them. Unless... "So what if we do not take them down? What if we just watch? Explain. We have eyes on the meeting. We can document who is here, who talks to whom, what alliances are being formed. That intelligence could be more valuable than arrests." Ashford was quiet for a long moment. "Continue surveillance. Document everything. But Collins, do not engage. Under any circumstances. Understood." The meeting lasted 3 days. Sarah watched it all, recording, photographing, cataloguing. She saw deals being struck and disputes being mediated. She watched as territories were divided and prices were set. And on the final night she saw the architect. He emerged from the chalet at midnight, walking alone through the snow to a terrace overlooking the valley. The light was poor, but her optics were good. She captured his face clearly for the first time, Anglo, perhaps 60 years old, with the weathered features of someone who had spent years in harsh climates. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against tanned skin. His eyes, even at this distance, seemed to hold a cold intelligence that made Sarah shiver. She transmitted the image to headquarters. The response came within the hour. Facial recognition positive. Subject is former CIA officer Malcolm Cross, reported deceased in 1995. He was believed killed in an operation in Afghanistan, but he was not dead. He had simply disappeared into the shadows, using his skills and connections to build an empire of crime. The meeting ended the next morning. The attendees scattered to their various corners of the world, taking with them plans and agreements that would shape the criminal landscape for the year to come. Sarah followed Volkov back to Prague, maintaining the surveillance while headquarters processed the intelligence she had gathered. The picture that emerged was comprehensive. The architect's network was even larger than they had suspected, with tentacles reaching into governments, corporations, and criminal organizations on every continent. Taking it down would require a coordinated global effort, involving dozens of agencies and months of preparation. But they had what they needed: names, faces, connections. The architecture of the architect, finally visible. Ashford called with instructions. "Return to base. You have done exceptional work. Now we let the analysts and the diplomats do theirs. And the architect, we know who he is now. Malcolm Cross cannot hide anymore. When we are ready, we will move." Sarah looked at Max, who was watching her with patient expectation. He was ready to keep going, to follow the trail to its end, but she understood the wisdom in Ashford's approach. Some enemies required patience. Some battles required time. She booked a flight home. The spring brought changes. The intelligence Sarah had gathered led to coordinated operations across 12 countries, resulting in the arrest of 14 of the 16 people who had attended the meeting in Switzerland. Criminal networks were dismantled. Weapons shipments were intercepted. Financial systems were frozen. The architect himself remained at large, but his empire was crumbling. Reports suggested he had gone to ground, his remaining assets scattered and disorganized. A man who had spent decades in the shadows was now exposed to the light. And in Atlanta, Sarah and Max continued their work. New cases, new challenges, new chances to make a difference. The task force had become their home, a place where their unconventional methods were valued rather than constrained. One morning in April, Sarah sat on her porch, watching Max chase squirrels in the backyard. The spring sun warmed her face. Birds sang in the trees. For a moment, the world seemed at peace. Her phone buzzed, a text from Ashford. "Cross has been located. Switzerland again. Different location. We are moving in 48 hours. Your presence is requested." Sarah stood, calling Max to her side. "Ready for one more, boy?" Max's tail wagged. He was always ready. They flew to Geneva that night. The briefing happened in a secure facility outside the city, attended by representatives from 6 countries. The operation would be unprecedented in scope, a simultaneous action targeting Cross and his remaining lieutenants across multiple jurisdictions. Sarah's role was specific. Cross had been traced to a villa in the Alps, similar to the chalet where she had observed the meeting. Her team would handle the primary assault, while Swiss authorities secured the perimeter. Max would be essential. The villa was believed to contain a safe room, hidden somewhere in the structure. If Cross retreated there, conventional search methods would not find him in time. But Max would find him. Max always found what needed to be found. The assault happened at dawn. Helicopters descended on the villa while ground teams secured the access roads. Sarah's unit breached the main entrance and began clearing rooms with practiced efficiency. The villa was opulent and empty. Staff had been dismissed. Security systems had been disabled. Someone had warned Cross. Search teams spread through the building looking for the safe room. Sarah unclipped Max's leash and gave him the command. "Find." Max moved through the villa with purpose, his nose low to the ground. He ignored the obvious spaces. The closets and cellars that search teams were already checking. He was looking for something hidden, something that did not want to be found. He led Sarah to a study on the second floor. Bookshelves lined the walls. A fireplace dominated one corner. Nothing seemed out of place, but Max was alerting. His posture told Sarah that the target was close. She studied the room, looking for anomalies. The bookshelves were standard. The furniture was ordinary. The fireplace was cold and clean, too clean. No ash, no soot, no signs of use despite the cold mountain weather. Sarah examined the fireplace more closely. The stonework around the opening was seamless. Too seamless. No joints, no mortar lines, nothing that suggested the individual blocks had been placed by hand. She pressed against the stone, searching for a trigger. On the third try, a panel swung open, revealing a narrow passage leading down into darkness. "Contact," she reported. "Hidden entrance, second floor study, moving to secure." She descended into the passage, Max at her heels, weapon ready. The stairs were steep and narrow, carved from the living rock of the mountain. Emergency lighting flickered along the walls, suggesting power was failing. The passage ended in a steel door, heavy and reinforced, but it was not locked. Someone had left in a hurry. Sarah pushed through into a room that served as both bunker and command center. Screens lined one wall, displaying feeds from cameras around the world. Servers hummed in racks along another, and in the center of the room, a figure sat at a desk, hands flat on the surface, watching her approach with cold eyes. Malcolm Cross, the architect. He looked older than his photograph, more tired, but the intelligence in his eyes was unchanged. "Lieutenant Collins," he said, "you have caused me a great deal of trouble, just doing my job." Cross smiled thinly. "Your job?" "Yes. Tell me, when you found that first device in Atlanta, did you have any idea what you were starting? I was stopping an attack. You were pulling a thread. And now look where it has led." His gaze moved to Max, who stood rigid at Sarah's side. "Remarkable animal. I have read the reports. He has quite the nose. Stand up slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." Cross complied, rising with the careful movements of a man who understood violence. "I am unarmed, Lieutenant. I am no threat to you. You are a threat to everyone." "Am I?" Cross gestured at the screens surrounding them. "I am a businessman. I provide services to those who need them. Weapons, information, solutions. I do not create the demand. I merely meet it. You tried to kill 500,000 people in Atlanta. I did no such thing. That was Harlan's operation. I merely provided some of the technical expertise." Cross shook his head. "Harlan was always too ambitious, too reckless. I warned him, but he would not listen. And the nuclear device in Savannah? Insurance. For clients who paid very well, but it was never my intention for it to detonate on American soil. Bad for business." Sarah felt disgust rising. "You talk about murder like it is a transaction. Everything is a transaction, Lieutenant. Lives, deaths, nations. It is all just currency in the end. The only question is who controls the exchange. You do not. Not anymore." Cross studied her for a long moment. "Perhaps not. But consider this. I have spent 30 years building a network that keeps certain powers in balance. Remove me, and that balance collapses. The weapons I controlled will scatter. The secrets I held will leak. The enemies I kept in check will move against each other, and against you. Is that a threat? It is a prediction. You think you are serving justice, Lieutenant, but you are serving chaos." Sarah raised her weapon slightly. "Let someone else worry about that." "Malcolm Cross, you are under arrest for conspiracy, arms trafficking and violations of international weapons treaties. Additional charges pending." Cross sighed, as if disappointed. "Very well, but remember this moment, Lieutenant. Remember that you were warned. She cuffed him and called for extraction. The aftermath was everything Cross had predicted and more. His arrest sent shockwaves through criminal networks and intelligence agencies alike. Assets he had controlled suddenly had no oversight. Secrets he had kept suddenly had no keeper. Old alliances fractured. New conflicts emerged. But the chaos was temporary. Nature, even criminal nature, abhors a vacuum. New powers rose to fill the space Cross had left. Some were worse than what came before. Some were better. The world continued to turn, and Sarah continued to work. In the years that followed, she and Max became legends in the task force, the officer and her dog who had brought down the architect. They tackled cases across the globe, finding what could not be found, stopping what could not be stopped. Max aged, of course. The years showed in his grey muzzle and slower pace. But his nose remained sharp, his instincts keen. The specialists who monitored his health marveled at his continued performance. When the time finally came, on a quiet autumn evening in Sarah's backyard, Max passed peacefully with his head in her lap. She stayed with him through the night, watching the stars wheel overhead, remembering all the trails they had followed together. The next morning, she returned to work. There were always more trails to follow, more threats to face, more justice to pursue. But she kept Max's collar on her desk, a reminder of the partner who had started it all. A parking meter in Midtown Atlanta, a dog who stopped at nothing, and a trail that led wherever it needed to go.